Williams' magnificent Seventh Symphony, Antarctica, tells an epic story of the British failed expedition to the South Pole in 1912. It's a story and a landscape that has in part become lost to history. Now we see the Antarctic through a tourist's lens, through familiar, pretty imagery. We've lost the ability to experience the dread and terror of this alien landscape for these early Antarctic explorers. Through the raw power of symphonic music, Vaughan Williams brings this epic but tragic story right back into our warm and comfy homes. It's 1912. Captain Robert Scott, along with 5 other intrepid explorers, sought to become the first humans ever to reach the South Pole. After weeks and weeks of perilous travel, they reached the pole only to discover they had been beaten by another party, led by the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. Scott and his party all perished on the desperate return journey, just 11 miles on their next depot of food and oil. Vaughan Williams' Seventh Symphony tells the story of Scott's tragic expedition, or at least paints a portrait of the place and some of the events. As Vaughan Williams himself put it, his job was to ignore details and to intensify the spirit of the whole situation by a continuous stream of music. The symphony itself emerged from the soundtrack Vaughan Williams wrote for the 1949 film Scott of the Antarctic. And both film and soundtrack, as well as fellow explorer Herbert Ponting's incredible photography, afford us a great insight into what the music may be trying to depict. So, let's go on a journey, an expedition into Vaughan Williams' Seventh Symphony, into the mysterious Antarctic interior, and into a bitter, bitter struggle for survival. The symphony opens with its main theme, large interlocking blocks of sound that suggest hard struggle for progress. And ambiguity. The blocks alternate not just distant remote keys, but also major and minor modes. Blocks are moving, but we're not sure if they're moving up or down, forward or back. It'll be a recurring feature of this symphony. Remember, Vaughan Williams isn't telling us a story in order, but rather presenting us with portraits of the landscape and of Scott's party. If we see anything here, it's a view of men, tiny, battling against an immense landscape, a heroic attempt that will turn into dreadful tragedy. You have to remember, this is the beginning of the 20th century. Antarctica is an entire immense continent of ice that had forever remained hidden from human gaze. Even the seas around Antarctica proved too perilous for humans until Captain Cook managed to sail there in the 18th century, but nobody had even seen the landmass of the entire Antarctic continent till the 19th century, just 100 years before Scott's attempt. This was an alien landscape absolutely uninhabitable for human life. Even if you managed to reach the icy continent, geography made the South Pole an extremely hard target. Massive glaciers covered a huge range of mountains that circled the southern pole like prison bars. And sitting atop these mountains, a vast plateau sat, over 1,000 kilometres wide, in the middle of which lay the prize, the Southern Pole. This was the 1912 equivalent of going to the moon. The attempt itself would take months, but behind that lay years of planning and preparation. The journey would involve jettisoning the caravan in stages before the final party attempted the final journey to their final target. Meanwhile, our first movement treats us to new sights, with Vaughan Williams orchestrating the sound of ice. But listen in the background, the strings lurking with danger. Antarctic explorers had learned to be constantly wary as death lurked around every corner. Crevasses, lethal temperatures, blizzards that could whip up in moments. Danger lurked everywhere. The rhythm section of the symphony commands particular attention for translating this icy landscape into actual sounds. Tactile sounds. I'm talking about the use of piano, organ, gongs, vibraphone, harp, xylophone, all really adding to this icy sonic landscape. And Vaughan Williams, of course, supplies us with wind. First with a solo soprano voice, then a choir of voices, and finally an actual wind machine. As titled, this first movement acts as a prelude, an introduction to our story, but also to our landscape. The second movement, for me, introduces our heroes properly. Scott's Antarctic expedition was a huge affair, with the ship, the Terra Nova, overloaded with equipment and a crew of 65, not including the horses and dogs they had also brought. However, even getting to the icy continent was an adventure in its own right. In traversing those dreadful weather zones where no landmass could stop the rush of storms through the sea, the entire expedition almost perished during a dreadful storm. But ship and crew survived, and as Scott's party approached this new and alien continent, they retreated to sights few had ever gazed on before, including the strange pack ice of the Ross Sea. There's wonder in the music, but also always that danger lurking underneath. It wasn't just new and strange horizons our explorers encountered. There were also new and strange animals, like orca whales that seemed harmless, or the penguins Vaughan Williams specifically composes for. As the crew unloaded at their Antarctic base, they were charmed by these penguins. Remember, this was before penguins had become a zoo attraction or a snack bar. Both crew and penguins were absolutely fascinated by each other. However, there was always danger lurking under the surface. The crew's photographer, Herbert Ponting, is almost killed when orca whales hunt him, barging the ice floats that he's been setting his camera up on. As Captain Scott later recorded in his diary, as they reared, it was possible to see their small glistening eyes and their terrible array of teeth, the largest and most terrifying in the world. It is clear they are endowed with singular intelligence, and in future we will treat that intelligence with respect. Scott's party had much to unload. Aside from all the scientific equipment, the party would attempt the pole with dogs, donkeys, and new motor tractors. The crew managed to unload safely and construct their winter base, but the South Pole remained far in the distance, not much less than a 2,000-mile round trip. Before winter set in, the party had a few months for the arduous work of laying food and fuel depots on the route ahead necessary for next year's assault on the pole, before hunkering down for the winter. The third movement of this amazing work is the best. Entitled Landscape, this really is a study in how to convey nature with music. Not pretty nature with pastoral walks, but an entirely alien natural world that our explorers were navigating for the first time. It's awe-inspiring, but it's also chilling. There's something about these reoccurring flutes that make me feel like I'm experiencing something natural but eerie, as if I'm in a tent watching canvas flapping in the wind. Sometimes the music presents us with wondrous sights, which we view almost vertiginously. But soon we are led back to those large blocks of sound this symphony employs so effectively. Large blocks of sound crossing one another. Like the progress Scott's party must themselves have felt, it's hard to know if we are going forwards or back, up or down. Vaughan Williams is adept at making a large sound, but he's also brilliant at making a large, quiet sound. That means employing large sections of the orchestra, all playing pianissimo, to create a sense of an awesome landscape that reaches endlessly on. But this symphony is more than a landscape. Vaughan Williams' music takes us outside our tents to the intense struggle onwards against the elements. In order to reach the plateau, Scott and his men had to haul themselves and their equipment up the Beardsmore Glacier, a 2-week climb that was one of the most gruelling parts of the entire journey. Vaughan Williams' music places us on the glacier with this harsh ascent. Large blocks of sound give the music a sense of chasms of ice, dangerous chasms of ice. The blocks of sound get louder until the organ thumps out a raw and impressive racket, a reminder of the grandeur of the views, but also of the dread of the terrible human tragedy about to unfold. I'm reminded of the terrible pain Scott's party must have felt on finally reaching the pole, but realising they had been beaten by the Norwegians. As Scott himself records in his diary, the worst has happened, all the daydreams must go. Great God, this is an awful place. I always wonder, if they had made the pole first and not carried that disappointment back with them, would they have survived the journey home? What follows is my favourite section of the whole symphony as brass belts out over the organ. It fascinates and terrifies. And the movement dies away in gusty textures, a reminder of the Antarctic wind that blows constantly across our story. The fourth movement brings us an interlude. The men's diaries record how much the explorers thought, dreamt about their homes, their loved ones, and particularly about food. The music in this short interlude reflects a brief respite from the torment. Our 5 men already were slowly starving. Unlike Amundsen, who used dogs, Scott and his men had to manhaul their supplies themselves. There was no way, at the altitudes in which they were labouring, that their bodies could absorb enough calories in a day to replace what they were losing through dragging their sledges. As the interlude continues, the dreams die away and we are brought back to a difficult reality. The pole was lost, but there still remained the desperate race home, and it was a race against the worsening weather of an approaching winter, hundreds and hundreds of miles of hard, painful slog. A bell tolls, and whenever we hear bells tolling in this symphony, it's ominous. And soon our brief interlude dies out, just like our last 2 movements, in silence. Leaving our explorers in a desperate race for survival. The final movement, appropriately, is a march. Scott and his 4 companions had to swallow the bitter disappointment of failing to reach the pole first and head back to base camp, but they had to hurry. Approaching winter meant approaching bad weather. This march is a dramatic fight against the elements, a desperate struggle for survival across hundreds and hundreds of miles of frozen desert. However, as the final movement continues, our march becomes a funeral march. The party of 5 is carrying an injured man, Petty Officer Taffy Evans. A fall probably causes a cerebral edema, and Evans is the first to perish on the return journey. The grim events continue, and some 4 weeks later, Captain Oates, suffering from a badly frostbitten foot, feels he's slowing down the party. Oates walks out from the tent one night, never to return. Was it sacrifice? Suicide? Both? Oates' famous parting words, recorded in Scott's diary, were,
"I'm just going outside. I may be away some time."
What you might describe as typical British understatement. The final 3 men struggle on for a week, a further 20 miles in fierce conditions, before a blizzard leaves them stranded in their tent just 11 miles from the next depot. Stranded in their tent for more than a week, where they finally perish. Bells toll ominously in this movement. Is that 5 tolls? As the symphony finishes, we are left with the wind and snow blowing over what now remains of our heroes, snuffled out in a final gust. It's so typical of Vaughan Williams to let his music drift into quietness, but a quietness with deep intensity. The story of Scott's adventure has perhaps become lost in the sands of time, but for my generation and earlier, Britons brought up on the idea of a faded empire, the Scott attempt and failure represented a story that said something about the entire nation. Vaughan Williams would have felt these same things about the story, the incredible landscape, the bravery of the men, but ultimately the tragedy and failure their deaths represented. That's all there in this symphony, but above everything, an original and beautiful interpretation of a fantastic landscape, which I think has nowadays become lost to us visually, since everything is so much more familiar for our eyes. But when you listen to this symphony, and in particular that middle movement, you get again, I think, the sense of the fantastical alien landscape our explorers were the first human beings ever to witness, filled with wonder, but also tremendous danger and ultimately death. Vaughan Williams' music allows us to experience this wonder and terror afresh, as if we were there ourselves, explorers on a frosty moon. Please like and subscribe.